So let's talk a little bit more about economic recovery or lack thereof. The latest jobs report showed little sign of economic recovery, in my opinion. 117,000 jobs were added, which was a slight increase over June's figures. However, while the unemployment rate dropped to 9.1%, we saw that as mostly because of a 14% increase in discouraged workers exiting the labor force and not being counted. In addition, the average duration of unemployment rose to 40.4 weeks. Does this further highlight a need for policymakers to redirect resources away from stimulating consumer spending and really fostering investments to try to stimulate long-term job growth? Does it send us any other messages?
Well, the short answer is yes, but let's probe that a bit. This country needs about 100,000 new jobs per month just to keep pace with the growth in the population and in the natural growth in the workforce. And if you don't get that, then the unemployment rate's going to go up. So 117,000 and the unemployment rate dipping a little bit wasn't a material difference. It's essentially a very weak report. What the problem is, and I discussed this in the July Longbrake letter in considerable detail, is that the policies that we've been pursuing, which are so-called demand stimulus policies, in other words, put money in people's pockets so that they can spend it, and then as they spend it, it will somehow lead to job creation, that hasn't been working. And the alternative that could have been pursued but has not been pursued would be actually direct programs to create jobs. How do you do that? Well, it would be through things as simple as supporting education, research and development, infrastructure building, and these are things that economists talk about and policy people have talked about, but really there has been no significant groundswell to do that. The problem now is, and this goes back to our discussion about the debt ceiling and the cut to the deficit,
right,
is we're out of room because job creation programs do require investment. They will require spending. Yes, you could do it in a way that it would involve public-private partnerships so that you would get the private sector participating, but the government has to be the catalytic agent for that to really work. They have to take the leadership. The focus is not there politically right now, and the resources are not available. So I'm not very optimistic about the ability to focus on job creation. I want to focus, again, this was in my July letter, that there's some research out there that hasn't got a lot of notice yet, but it's well done. It focuses on where does job creation come from, and the findings of the research are that the vast preponderance of all new jobs created on a net basis come from new startups, firms in their first 5 years of existence. So this would be innovation, entrepreneurialism, and so forth. What the evidence shows when you look at the data, Michelle, is that the number of new startups has dropped precipitously by about 30% over the last several years. So we're not creating the new businesses that create the new jobs. Now then the next question would be, well, why isn't that happening? Well, there are a variety of reasons. Probably the most obvious one is that given the financial problems that we've had since 2008, it's hard to get loans. Your home equity, which used to be a good source of credit for a budding entrepreneur, it isn't there.
Anymore, right.
It might be you're underwater moored, but you're not going to get any financing from that. So access to financing is a major problem. But I would say it goes beyond that. Again, it goes back to a lack of systematic support out of our institutions, and this again goes to government, of job training, education. If you want to be an entrepreneur, how do you avoid making mistakes, things of that sort. What access to resources do you have? But there's been no systematic effort to do that. You could add to that, many people do uncertainty. Are you going to go into business when it's not clear that we're in an environment that's going to be successful? The risks are much elevated. Regulations have been actually increasing. Right. So the environment is quite hostile, actually, to new business formation. If we wanted to get the jobs going again, I would call this would be rebuilding America, not by just plowing money in and hoping that somehow it will magically create jobs, but actually intentionally focus on how do you create the jobs on a more direct basis. That would require a lot of effort, it would take resources, and it would take a long time for it to actually materialize, but I don't see a better alternative.
Right. And unfortunately right now we are lacking resources, and I think most people are looking for something, anything that will give some short-term benefits.
Well, that's unfortunately, that's our society, is we are hooked on the quick fix, and the quick fixes are not working.
Right, and they're not going to work to solve this problem.
No.